Here we are, back at it again. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. Can't believe it's episode 16 already. Kentucky. Want to thank everybody. Hit 11,000 subs last night. Pretty cool. Pretty excited about how things are going. Last few videos have been well received, and that's always a good feeling. You know, anytime you put work into something. It's been a lot of long years leading up to this, and in a sense, preparing myself, uh, in a way, I guess. Um, Archiving all this material over the years. I never thought it would lead to something like this, and it's been a lot of fun, and I've really been enjoying it. And I wouldn't keep doing it if it wasn't for you guys. So thank you again. As we always do, I like to go back and kind of look at the last episode a little bit. For those who may have missed Tennessee, a lot of things to look back towards or think back on that are going to correlate with this episode. Especially when you think about, mummies, subterranean worlds, and all that jazz. And I put out a short video called Ancient Tennessee, Tolkien's Real Middle Earth. And I like that transition into this episode because it's going to resonate a lot. And I also did an updated video on an article from my Missouri episode. And that video is called The Mississippi River is the Real Nile, or is the True Nile? Something like that. And yeah, also going to overlay nicely with this episode. We're going to be covering a lot of the cities in Kentucky. And similar to just about every one of my episodes now, we're going to show that these cities and towns are built on top of these subterranean networks. And that many of these mound complexes and, ancient ruins are connected underground. And due to one, if not two or three, apocalyptic, cataclysmic events, whatever you want to call them, the realm has been covered. In some places, hundreds, if not 1,000 feet or more. And looking all the way back to my Anomalous America Washington episode, we talked about the ocean, the beach found at 1,000 feet in Tacoma, Washington. And makes you think what kind of waves, rising and falling of the Earth's surface would cause such burial events, where 1,000 feet of earth could be placed upon a beachfront property, so to say. And I did a preview episode for this one called Subterranean Wonders, 1,000 feet below Kentucky. It's about a hole in the ground that was known about for 50 plus years. And the air exiting the cave or the hole was so cold that it would freeze meat or anything that you hung over the hole. And I think that was a great way to kick off this episode. So if you haven't seen that, not a big deal. I'm going to go over in this article or in this episode. But if you have, fantastic. You're a little bit ahead. Welcome everybody again. Those just making their way in. Appreciate you all. What else to talk about? I did an interview with Greg Reese. You can check that out. He's on Twitter and Substack. Um, one of several interviews to come. Um, yeah, it's always nice to sit down with people that have a lot of very similar opinions. It was a effortless conversation, and like always with anything related to this subject matter, we just ran out of time as always, and we covered. It's kind of a good intro into my work and getting it, getting situated on how he looks at things and how you know my presentations can kind of add to that perspective and how he presents information through his medium. So you can check him out on Substack, Greg Reese. I also did an interview with Beyond the Forbidden. That video is up now on YouTube. Same situation. First time talking with him, and uh, time went fast. We didn't cover a lot of material, but a similar situation. It'll lead to more conversations in the future. Um, when I don't know, and finding time to do interviews. As some of you are aware, my channel started out. My plan was originally to just kind of do a interview based channel where I just bring on people that I was interested in and correlate my own work with theirs. And as that went on, I realized that was going to be kind of a futile exercise for me, as scheduling with these people became rather difficult. My life is every day, my schedule has to change, like in an instant for family and kids, and, especially with sports and football starting up and school's back up in a week. And so it just didn't work. I had to cancel too many times, or and that's just not fair to people. So I morphed the channel into just presenting my own little videos and opinions here and there, and when I have time to record. And I'm again super happy it's going so well. So again, check out Greg Reese and check out Beyond the Forbidden. Uh, Greg just posts on his Substack. You can search Greg Reese and Beyond the Forbidden on YouTube. I think you guys will enjoy both of those interviews. But for time's sake, let's quit my jibber jabber, huh? And jump into some material. Just run it through chat really quick here. Master Willie, it's always good to see you. Thanks for being here. Sherry, welcome. Shiva Shampoo. Brett, love you, brother. Thanks for being here. Stellium, where's Stellium? There he is. Thanks for being here, brother. Many feathers, familiar faces. Love it. Love to see you guys here. Hopefully, there's a few new people here. Yeah, people were wondering, why the hell would I do a live stream this early in the morning? Micmac, welcome. Always good to see you. Thanks for being here. Micmac, you'll love this. You're gonna love this episode if you could make it through the whole thing. It's gonna be a lot of amazing correlations again, tying in nicely, and why I'm working my way up the Mississippi. People are always asking me, "Do my state, do this. When are you gonna get to this state? What do you?" I think I had stated by California that my plan was to work to the Mississippi and then go up the Mississippi. Um, Myself, I've been to many of the states on the Mississippi, and have a lot of fond memories of that area and the South as well. But from a textual standpoint, my material is incredibly dense along the Mississippi, and I think it's a great insight into ancient America. So I'm going to work my way up probably to Illinois, and maybe head towards Minneapolis, Wisconsin. I don't really know just yet, but I'm going all the way up the Mississippi towards the Great Lakes. So just a heads up on that. Oh yeah, Brian Wood, thank you, new member. Anybody that's interested in supporting me and being a member, I appreciate you. Thanks to your Greg Reese interviews, I just found out. Awesome, welcome. Yeah, so again, back to what I was saying. My and Almost America episodes go live on Tuesday mornings, and I record early because recording a live episode is only really possible when my children are sleeping. So here we are. So I'm super happy that anyone can even be here. 50 of you 5:30 in the morning, 8:30 if you're on the East Coast. But yeah, back to the material. So again, if you haven't checked out the preview episode, I would do so after this, but I'm going to cover the material here a little bit. I won't read the whole article. We're going to hop on Twitter. I put together a little thread. I haven't been doing this very often just because I've kind of been getting shadow banned on Twitter. You know, I have less views now at almost 13,000 followers than I did at 1,000. So, um, yeah, my posts are pretty much hidden behind the world of Twitter. So I don't invest too much time in it. But for presentation's sake, and because I do have so much material on there, especially material that I'm not going to be able to invest a bunch of time to go back through archives and try to find the original. So, um, good little short articles that I don't have full PDFs saved. We're going to use that medium and do that. So yeah, we're going to hop on here and just look at some. We'll look at some old cities. We'll look at some, the Louisville Exposition and stuff like that. So again, if you don't follow me on Twitter, not a big deal. I'm kind of morphing away from investing a ton of time into the platform for obvious reasons, as I stated. So you can see like something like this, a thread that has dozens and dozens of posts, 16 likes. I can post a picture of a pair of shoes on Instagram and get more likes than that. And and I have less than like a 1/15th the sub count. So, and I'm used to that. My posts have been shadowed for on and off for years, so it's pretty normal. But just a heads up on that. A lot of my followers don't even see my posts. I have so many messages that unless they go and actually look at me through the profile links and click on my name, they don't even see my posts. So that's interesting. I guess that gives me a little more validation that the closer you get to these types of things, that happens, and that's okay. So yeah, here's the thumbnail for the Subterranean Wonders video. You'll love it, guys. They find eyeless whales and eyeless sharks 1,200 feet below the surface of Kentucky. Here's the Southern Exposition, Louisville, 1883. In the narrative with a lot of these expositions are just so hilarious. You just have to laugh at them. They were having a hard enough time um, providing basic materials in Kentucky for the residents. And, like a lot of these expositions, these things pop up and kind of defy our understanding of the late 1800s. And this building is absolutely, mind blowing, like a lot of them. When you see what was going on in Louisville, in 1870 to where this city is now, it's quite remarkable. And the explosion is, kind of essentially overnight. Electrical railways, you know, um, model farms, quote model farms, and we'll explore some more stuff about the model farm idea and the ancient agriculture that was going on here in the Mississippi Valley. Just seems to be kind of a hit with everybody, so I tend to keep posting more pictures when I can. I wanted to show. I'm going to show some old bird's eye views, just because these are great. Again, providing kind of an insight into what was going on. What's remarkable about Frankfurt when I first started looking into it is that similar to my state capital here, Salem, Oregon, you have these two monstrous buildings down here. I know it may not be let's get rid of my face and zoom in a little bit more. The state capital here, and then this building right here, which has changed names several times. It was first called the Supply House. 60% of this town isn't even here when these are built. And Salem, Oregon is very similar. When you look at Salem, they have, on my bird's eye view map, they actually have real pictures, which is insanely rare. You don't see that on almost any of these. And these two buildings are standing there alone. There's like nothing around them for blocks and blocks and blocks. And this is how Frankfurt looked when these buildings supposedly were constructed, right? You have these two massive buildings, and there was literally nothing around. The idea of a Capitol building that, has 4 or 5 basement levels being in this type of a environment when there's not even streets, like the whole northern part of the river here wasn't even developed. There was nothing up here. And I'd say at least 50% of this didn't exist. So you're looking at streetcars, and eventually this town had an electric railway. A lot of things just don't make sense. And that's kind of what we're exploring here. And we're going to talk more about what lies beneath these cities, like many instances. Paris, Kentucky, similar situation. It's on a large bluff, and inside this bluff here, there's endless caves. Very interesting. This kind of central area here. I apologize. I know it's kind of hard to see, but this central town. This was like the center of town here, and you had a quote Capitol building, the capital of the town, and then a church building. Um, it's on a bluff that's like 80 feet tall, and it just doesn't make any sense at all. And the cave systems can run under the whole part of the town here. It's almost like that's the running theme here in Kentucky is find a cave system and build the town on top of it. Here's Lexington, similar concept. The state building, quote state building again, um, standing alone. Um, this is a um, hospital building. You know, what's these early townships without an asylum? Um, Padua, all these buildings are really quite beautiful. Same story as I've been showing in all of these cities coming through, Alaska all the way down. Here we are in Kentucky. That 1870, they're building. Not one of these buildings is survives, and they're all quite incredible. I mean, you build something like this today, and you would still be very surprised. Um, and they wouldn't build it the same way. A lot of these are stone, brick buildings. Similar story with this. To the northwest part of town, cave systems all along the mountain range here. And I wouldn't call it a mountain range. It's just, 100 feet of elevation or so. Louisville, 1876, the industrial capital of the region. Very interesting bridge. Um, yeah. So let's hop back to some quick little read through here. I want to start with a specific article that's going to be a good introduction. Um, Just the way it's worded, I think, is a perfect way to start the episode. 75 of you, welcome. Those just getting in here, just kind of doing a glance back at what's been going on, and wanted to thank everybody again for helping me break 11,000 subs last night. Grateful for it. It's only August. What's the new goal now? Let's go for 20K by 2024, right? By the end of December, 20 subs, 20,000. I think we can break that. Not that it really matters, but it's important to have goals for me strategically and in my mind. I'm very much a kind of mind's eye person, and that before things can happen, you have to see them existing in your mind. So just want to share all those things with you and milestones. I can't achieve them without you guys showing interest and enjoying the work that I'm putting out there. So yeah, it means a lot. Mr. C, welcome. It's good to see any of my subscribers this early in the morning. So if you're in Salem, you are up early. Oh yeah, I'm in the suburbs of Portland, about half an hour outside of Portland. So it is early, yes, but it's not early for me. I get up, you know, I dictate my hours for work, and I start about 2 in the morning, so I can be done with my day when my kids are finishing breakfast. So this is pretty average for me. But yeah, so here we are. The Mammoth Cave. Now we're going to do a few articles on the Mammoth Cave because due to its size and certain events that happened, um, what they found and how far they were able to explore, it changed over time. So we'll read more than one opinion and perspective on this, but this is one of my favorites just from a verbiage standpoint. The Mammoth Cave. The Mammoth Cave is an antiquity of the world before the flood, a city of giants which an earthquake swallowed, and which a chance roof of rocks has protected from being effaced by the deluge, and by the wear of the elements for subsequent ages, is one of the fancies which its strange phenomena force upon the mind. All is so architectural. It is not a vast underground cavity, raw and dirty, but a succession of halls, domes, and corridors, streets, avenues, and arches, all underground, but all telling of the design and proportion of a majestic, primeval metropolis. It is not a cave, but a city in ruins, a city from which sun, moon, and stars have been taken away, whose day of judgment has come and passed, and over which a new world has been created and grown old. But what admirable laws of unknown architecture those mammoth roofs and ceilings are upheld is every traveler's wondering question. In some shape or other, I heard each of my companions express this. No modern builder could throw up such high vaulted arches and so unaccountably sustain them. And all else is in keeping. The cornices and columns, aisles and galleries are gigantically proportionate and as mysteriously upheld. Streets after streets, miles after miles, seem to have been left only half in ruins, and here and there is an effect as if the basement and lower stores were encumbered with fragments and rubbish, leaving you to walk on a level with the capitals and floors once high above the pavement. It might be described as a mammoth Herculeum, first sepulchred with overtopping mountains, but swept and choked afterwards by the waters of the deluge, that found their way to its dark streets in their subsiding. What scenery and machinery this will be for the poets of the West by and by. Their Parnasse is a house ready furnished. Yeah, just love that article. Just the way it's structured, and if you've been following my channel long enough, you've seen that the subterranean realm conversation is a powerful one, and probably some of the strongest evidence of prehistoric civilizations um, correlates with this. And I think now we've probably shown that at least half of the major cities in these states I've covered, these states that I've covered, are situated on top of, if not ancient ruins and ancient buildings themselves, at least a subterranean network of some kind, cave system, rivers, oceans, lakes. But yeah, so we'll get into some big ones with a little more detail. One of the oldest articles I could find on Mammoth Cave, just so we can, I really love the older the perspective, the better. What are they saying? Giving me some more type of time frames and stuff like that. So we're gonna knock out a few just smaller articles here before we get into the bigger ones. Instead of starting with the big ones and watching the time diminish and not being able to cover a wider range of topics. So yeah, let's start right up here. We're going to go with unearthed ancient relics. What was the date on this one? 1893, Wyoming territory. Bones and weapons of mound builders disinterred in Kentucky. While digging a well near Sand Spring, Kentucky, recently a number of human bones were disinterred together with a quantity of weapons, spearheads, arrows, and axes of copper, obsidian, and very good brass. Now, this is important too, because that's something we're going to keep coming back to. These quote ancients, their ability to temper brass and copper was very advanced, unlike anything we had ever seen when we were first uncovering this in the 1800s. You know, obviously we had steel and iron and such, but from a quote ancient standpoint, some of this copper and brass was harder, not harder, but as hard as steel. And their way of tempering was not something that we had seen yet. So very, very interesting. And quantities of brass and copper. Again, the copper, I'm sure, being traced to the Great Lakes region, as copper wasn't found in great abundance this far south. And a big marker again to what I was discussing in the last few episodes about the Mississippi being a absolutely huge and populous trading network where you had people from all across the globe or realm, disk, whatever you prefer to call it, venturing here and traveling up the Mississippi. And we have, you know, cannabis and all kinds of corn and all kinds of things that have found their way out of the Mississippi Valley and into places like India and Europe, Africa. The axes, especially, showing very fair workmanship. The bones all belonged to male skeletons, with the exception of one of the best preserved, which was that of a woman, about whose skull was bound a crown or a sort of diadem of silver, set with an opal cut with skill. Now, this is very rare, very, very rare. You guys have heard me talk about opals and the petrifaction and type of events that occurred that creates opals. I love opals. I'm a collector of rocks and crystals and have a few pretty interesting opals. One of these days, I'll get a better camera and I'll share some of my specimens with you guys. But I've discussed the opal factor several times with the petrified trees and how they had petrified trees, whole trees that were nearly 100% opal. They were like 90% opal. So I find this very interesting, of course, you know, not only that it's a crown made of silver, but that there's an opal cut and extraordinary size and luster. From the appearance of these remains, says the Philadelphia Times, it is probable that this was an ancient battleground on which the slain were buried as they fell. Local and I want to, just because again this is, you know, kind of my baby as far as like nurturing an idea, and that, you know, I mentioned earlier the video I did um, was ancient Tennessee, the setting for Tolkien's Middle Earth. So we've talked about dwarfs. We remember we talked about that dwarf graveyard they found in Tennessee with 100,000 bodies, 100,000 dwarfs, and they said that they were different than pygmies. They were different than your average quote Aboriginal Indian race, and they were different from the giants that were buried but less than a quarter mile away. So we have pygmies, we have dwarfs, and we have giants all living in the Mississippi Valley before before the quote Native American Indian culture that we know of today. In fact, they tell the story that even though they may have 4, 5, 8 generations in that specific area, they are inhabiting regions where they said that the place was filled with um, sacred sites and ruins of buildings and so on and so forth. And yeah, so as we get farther into this article and more into kind of uncovering the Egyptian, um, yeah, Middle Earth subterranean realms, you know, Micmac knows where I'm going with this, but um, and correlating again, is the Mississippi the original Nile River? I've been saying this for a long time, and I've covered the ancient river names and how we can correlate not only the ancient river names of America being the foundational roots for a lot of the river names in the world, but also it showing and correlating nicely back to a time where we were of a similar language or phenotype, one, if not maybe within three distinct groups. That ergo Finnic root that is correlated perfectly with not only Chinese, but Etruscan and Aztec and Phoenician and, Egyptian and all these things. So, again, back to the article though. Where was I? He declared that they were a battlefield with bodies that fell. Local archaeologists who have examined the skull declare that they are not those of Indians, but of a people of superior intelligence. Some of the skeletons are 7 feet in height, one measuring 8 feet 4 inches. This latter's breastbone is shattered by a copper knife, which was still sticking in the severed bone. The presence of the woman's remains is not to be accounted for, except that she may have been the queen of the tribe and in person led her host to battle, sharing in their lot and being interred with them. Among the relics, now again, this article in general is incredible, but this relic I want to stand out. Among the relics is a lamp provided with a wick which has hardened almost to stone, and on the body of which runs a curious inscription cut into the brass. The lettering resembles that of Egyptian monuments. There is also an engraving on it of an insect strangely like the scarab of that country. Now, I've done a video on the scarab beetle. This not only does it cover the symbolism, but also it covers it from a historical standpoint. The beetle that we know as the Egyptian scarab is actually based on a beetle that's found here in North America and into Mexico. And there's some hybrid versions of it that are found in South America. Similar to the idea of Anubis and the dog that's based on, and that a lot of these historical, mythological figures that we consider to be Egyptian are actually finding their foundational roots here. And the scarab beetle, check out my scarab video if you haven't seen that. It's a good one, and I talk a little bit more about the symbology there than anything, and I make some correlations with radium. The body of a scarab beetle is composed almost entirely of bismuth. Now, this is just a small piece, and I know that my camera quality is not very good, but this is just a tiny piece. I have some really big specimens. This is bismuth. Bismuth naturally attracts radium. It's also an incredible electrical magnetic conductor. And the scarab shell is composed almost entirely of bismuth. Bismuth exists in the decay of radium. It's an incredible substance. I know you may not be able to see very well, but it creates geometric patterns. And when you put electrolysis through bismuth, it can establish all kinds of interesting patterns. You can play music through bismuth, and when it solidifies, it will solidify the actual sound waves into interesting square shapes. But yeah, so that's something else in a video you can look into, my scarab beetle episode. But again, so what are they finding? They're finding a brass lamp covered in Egyptian writing with a carved scarab etched onto the side of this lantern. Where was I? There is also, yep, another reminder of ancient history is found in the fact that one of the skeletons has seized another by the heel, and his teeth are still to be seen fixed and crunching the bone in his grasp. That these people were identical with the mound builders is more than probable, for it is known that the vanished race was particularly numerous here. So, connecting again these quote mound builders, and what I've been showing you and going back again to was the Mississippi, the original Nile River, and the idea of the mound builders being the Egyptian culture as we know it. At least not as we know it. I apologize. The idea of the Egyptian culture as we know it today actually existing here in the foundational roots of it being, not only along the Nile but extending all the way to the Pacific or the East Coast, the Atlantic. Although we've found Egyptian hieroglyphics and other similar relics all the way into California. So, and some odd Grecian style overlays in Alaska. So, this culture was trading worldwide, as we've stated, with what the Mississippi was really looking like. You know, um, the idea that the Mississippi was populated by hundreds of millions of people. And if you remember my Mississippi Bayou video, we talked about this in the canal systems of Louisiana. That the canal systems in Louisiana and Mississippi alone are enough to state that we were dealing with incredibly advanced race that was literally terraforming hundreds and hundreds of square miles of land, not only to make it drought resistance, to add kind of like the idea of how the Nile floods in Mississippi would do the same, but also it would be preventative to soften hurricanes and many other things along the way. But this terraforming exists all the way up through Tennessee and into Kentucky. And I'll go as far as to state that these subterranean worlds, as I mentioned in the Mammoth Cave article that I started with, are markers that was probably closer to ground level previous to some incredible events. Probably something similar to, as I stated in my what was going on in 1811 and 1812, the New Madrid event, the New Madrid earthquake, where the whole chasms were opened up and the Mississippi was flowing down into the earth and not even flowing across the land, and the waters rolled backwards and all kinds of crazy stuff, right? Comets and amazing things going on in the sky. The sun turned bright red, and yeah, crazy shit going on for sure. But we're going to continue on. I tend to ramble. 116. Welcome everybody. For those that have just got in here, just did a little kind of background about correlating this with other episodes and some of the other videos I've done leading up to this. And I talked a little bit about the preview episode I did with the subterranean ocean. And yeah, I started off with a Mammoth Cave short little article to kind of get us into some of the bigger material. And we're just going through some of my smaller clippings first before I get into the really big stuff. A Kentucky prehistoric city. Mr. Green Botts, the owner of a farm at Peeled Oak on Slate Creek, a noted section of Bath County, in plowing up about 60 acres of land this spring, discovered the ruins of a city of regular streets curbed with stone and evincing a higher order of architectural knowledge and a greater civilization than any other prehistoric remains yet found in this county. Many years ago, a faint trace of a similar city was noticed in Montgomery County near Mount Sterling. But the owners of the land, this is the important part, but the owners of the land, having little taste for backward researches, almost or entirely obliterated the evidence to make room for corn growing. Now, this is like something that we have to really understand, that these discoveries in the 1800s were so abundant and numerous that people just didn't even care. People were literally pulling up relics like you wouldn't believe. And often they were either sold to the highest bidder, which was not much. But these farms, some of these farms, you could go for hundreds of miles and you couldn't plow an acre without running into something. And this is just surface level. I mean, again, people familiar with what I present, we go down hundreds of feet into the earth. So if this is just surface level, the Mississippi on all sides, the idea that in the 1800s we're moving west of the Mississippi and populating these areas that that had nobody in them or were very sparse. It just goes to show you that something happened, some event or several events, and that what was once an incredibly densely populated region was just completely buried and completely wiped out. We've shown the graveyards that are found all over the Mississippi now. And they're not just graveyards of normal people, they're all kinds. Again, going back to the Tolkien reference that I made, that we have to kind of open our minds, and truth is stranger than fiction, and that these kind of fantasy narratives, that Tolkien was writing about, even Tolkien himself said that his stories were based on what he believed was a real history. Now, where was that history? Why is there such a Finnish root to worldwide languages? Something that I've talked a lot about, and if you've seen my talks with Dr. Longo, Old World Florida, we've bridged a lot of these gaps here. This being a fresh discovery, we have no doubt it will be visited by Professor Shaler, an archaeologist, and the prehistorians of the county at large. The land adjoins a large tract belonging to General William Preston of Lexington. So, one of the issues too that happened was that if you're plowing the land and you're just trying to live off the land and you got a family to take care of and on and on, what are you going to do? You're going to call in the state, then you're going to the land, then they're going to have people on your land digging the shit up for who knows how long. And I see both sides, and it's a different time back then. You weren't going to the grocery store. You weren't taking your wagon trip into town that was maybe 6 hours away or who knows how long. And this is your livelihood. And like I stated, that many of these farmers, you couldn't plow an acre without digging up something. So, often it was just kept between the family. They'd find stuff and they couldn't afford to call in the state and have them do a dig on their property that could take months, if not more. And then you're out all that land that you need to provide for your family. It was a different time back then, but the relics were dense. And as I've been showing again through this whole series, that there wasn't an area that we've talked about, especially the most desolate desert, that wasn't covered with an immense population. I mean, all of Arizona, all of New Mexico, all of Colorado was covered. Hundreds and hundreds of square miles of canals, of buildings, of immense populations, immense agricultural advancement that we stole a lot of our own ideas from. I mean, even the canals in Arizona are literally cleared out canals from these ancient people. I don't want to read that one because we're going to read a whole article. I definitely want to do this one. Okay. So this one is Ancient Fortifications of Kentucky, 1861. A wonderful fortification. There are many wonderful natural curiosities, antiquated relics to be found in Kentucky, and one of the most remarkable of them is to be found in Allen County on the Tennessee border and 17 miles from Bowling Green, where a wall of solid limestone, 200 yards in length, 40 in height, 30 feet at the base, and 6 feet wide at the top, crosses a neck formed by a bend in Drake's Creek and encloses a peninsula of 200 acres, elevated 110 feet above the river. On the top of this natural mound is an area of 3 acres. Now, I would strongly suggest that this is not a natural mound. And as we've been showing with many of these quote natural mounds or these burial mounds, that you can go 10, 20, 50, 100 feet into the earth and keep finding stone structures. I mean, many of these pyramidal quote mounds, they go 4 or 5 stories below the earth's surface. Monk's Mound goes 4 or 5 stories down, and then below that there's a subterranean highway underneath that goes into the mountains, which are connected with the cave systems that we've been mentioning. So the cave systems are connected with these mound systems, all with a subterranean highway. Was that subterranean highway always subterranean? I'm not sure. It could definitely be. I think that a lot of these people were aware of these kind of crazy events that would take place in the sky, and they were prepared, and that they had quite a substantial amount of construction underground, and that's where they would retreat to. On the top of the natural mound is an area of 3 acres enclosed by a wall and a ditch, forming one of the strongest fortresses in the world. It is not improbable that the fortress of war may cause this old fortification, built, it is supposed, antecedent to a race of men who held the country when discovered by Europeans. This is what I've been saying all along, is that these star forts and these quote Civil War forts, as this person is stating clearly, was antecedent. This was here before any European country came or before was occupied by any hostile force. And I have engineers and architects stating that many of these star forts were obviously not built to be defensive positions, but had some other use. Now, I state that they're also subterranean. That many of these forts had tunnel systems connecting them. Now, the story we're told is that they were related to sending messages during the war. Right, during the Civil War, you needed ways of communicating, and that they communicated by way of tunnel. Now, going back to the mound systems and everything, that seems a little fishy to me, when you already have shown that these ancient highways existed long before, and that these fortifications are antecedent again This last few sentences here are the most important. Antecedent to a race of men who held the country when discovered by Europeans to be occupied by a hostile force and made to play a prominent part in this civil contest. So basically, they're just throwing that whole thing out of the water there. That these had nothing to do with the Civil War, and that they were there long, long, long before even the Europeans. So this is pre 1700s, and I have river maps that are carved onto horns that show rivers all along New York, at least what we call New York now. And the Great Lakes were covered in star forts. That star forts ran all along every river. And when you look at old Civil War maps, you can find the same thing. Many of these forts, either if they are still there, they're not identified as such, and if you can find traces of it, they're often buried below the surface, or they simply use them as a quarry and stole all the stone from the fort to build things in the city. But I say that all along the Mississippi, all along the Missouri River. Now, remember, that's a very, very, very long distance. That just about every place you'd have any kind of habitation, there was a star fort, and that they were uh, intimately connected with not only the subterranean world, cave systems, but also with water. And a lot of people have different theories about their use, but um, they definitely are antecedent to the Europeans and to a former race of before them. I'd say maybe even before the mound builders are correlating to the mound builders as well. um, Yeah, I'm just trying to be careful because I do have large articles on certain things here. So, but this is a good one. A cave has been discovered in Kentucky which contains mummies and Masonic emblems, a pyramid, several tablets with queer hieroglyphics, bronze wares, and pieces of pottery. One mound was opened and found to contain 6 well preserved mummies, reposing in regular order with feet radiating from the center. It is assumed that these relics unlock the history of the prehistoric race of America and prove their identity with the ancient Egyptians race, who it is conjectured crossed over and peopled this continent, built temples, and flourished in a high degree of civilization until extinguished by the ruthless hand of the savage. This cave will be a mecca for the curious Andalite scientific research and examination. Now, again, you already know how I feel about prehistoric race traveling over here. I think that the dating, again, you know how I feel about dating, but the subterranean nature of much of these realms show a far larger degree of antiquity, in my own opinion. Especially when we can trace the mummies that we found in Arizona and Utah and California, and then you can just look at episode 1, Alaska. I think that alone should kind of reveal that the narrative of populating and who came from where just is destroyed. Yeah, Star Ford, Star People. Yeah, good one, McMack, of course. Yeah, I was just talking about this the other day when I was talking about the cities with 7 hills and how there's, a dozen or more cities with 7 hills, and that these Star Ford, Star People were building um, huge structures in relation to the Pleiades star system, and that those areas were covered either mud flood or deluge or something, and tons of earth were put on top of these large buildings, and these cities of 7 hills became that, and that they were hills when in fact they're large ancient buildings. You got Cincinnati, you got Rome, Georgia, on and on. There's many, many, many. There's several in Mexico. But yeah, so great little paragraph there. Holy shit, right? Just so much that we could touch on. We started off with that article where they found the queen with the silver crown and the opal put inside of it. Um, this is a good one. We're going to get into a deeper article on this one, but this is worth talking. A wonderful cave. Another wonderful cave has recently been discovered near Glasgow Junction, Kentucky. It has already been explored for a distance of 23 miles in one direction. The avenues are very wide. A span of horses can easily be driven through a distance of 11 miles. Three rivers, wide and very deep, are encountered on the long route. One of them is navigable for 14 miles until the passage becomes too narrow to admit a boat. This forms the third or river route which has been explored in a boat. The cave is wonderful beyond description and far surpasses in grandeur the Mammoth or any other cave ever before discovered. Several mummified remains have been discovered in one of the large rooms. They were reposing in stone coffins, rudely constructed, and from appearances may have been in this cave for centuries. They present every appearance of the Egyptian mummies. The owner of the cave, Thomas Kelly, or rather was a few days ago a very poor man struggling to make a payment on the farm of 24 acres, upon which, by mere accident, the entrance to this wonderful cave was discovered. He obtained about $400 for three of the mummies. This is a very common and disturbing fact that correlates again. $400 for this man probably paid his mortgage for the year, if not several years. And these relics are gone to private hands. And we're gonna show even more disturbing things they were doing with these mummies in some more articles to come. And is now offered 10,000 cash for the cave. The newly discovered cave has been named the Grand Crystal Cave and is as beautiful as its name implies. Ladders and bridges are being constructed, and Mr. J.R. Puckett, a capitalist of the town, announces his intention of having a small steamboat constructed expressly for the purpose of navigating its wonderful rivers. Crazy, and later on in Kentucky's history, you could take boat tours in Mammoth Cave. But as you see stated, the capitalist, the investor in the town, right? He wants to buy it for 10,000, and all the exploring they'll do will be private for the first little while until they find all the really crazy shit, and then that goes into private hands, and then they open it up to the public. That's always how it works. And a certain percentage of the cave will be closed off to the public. It's never the whole thing. Many of these cave systems that are still open to the public today, they only allow you to explore, 10 to 50% of the cave. Things they can't tear off the walls, things they can't take out of the cave, and things they can't have you seeing. That's how it works. Um, mm, mm, mm. Another good one here. This is an older one. Anything older than 1860 is hard to find. Western Letter on Antiquities, Lancaster, Ohio, 1841. Messer, Abel, and Co. Some of the Indian tribes of North and South America have traditions respecting the early settlement of this country by pure white people. This would intimate immigration from the northern part of Europe through Great Britain rather than that by Bering Straits from Western Asia. Now, again, we have to just completely destroy these ideas because we were dealing with an incredibly advanced seafaring race. And the idea that these people just walked for 20, 30 years, 40 years across the Bering Strait is ridiculous. And the journey alone, you would face, at least a full season, and you wouldn't make it. And this correlates again to not long ago in the historical record, Alaska was a tropical place. So how can we even stick with these ideas of nomadic tribes wandering? Even the idea of some of these nomadic tribes that ventured from the northern latitudes into, the Mississippi Valley, so on and so forth. These people were openly trading with one another. So to say that they were, you know, cavemen or whatever, these kind of ideas that we have, um, those ideas are just ridiculous. And that the deeper down we go into the earth, we find far more advanced people, construction, kind of ideas of religion, and the not only that, but the animals and the people get bigger and bigger the deeper you go. But yeah, so you just gotta have to listen to people formulate these ideas because that was the norm back then, but we know better now. Like that of the Indians themselves, while okay, I already said that, and long been noted for whiteness of skin and just long, fair, silken hair, as is discovered on American mummies. Now, Another thing to know, we talked about different phenotypes living in the same area. We had dwarfs and pygmies and giants living in the same area in Kentucky and Tennessee, all within a mile of each other. So, and they had different burial ideas. This correlates with the Emperor Tigrinus video I did in New Mexico, where they found what they believe to be the oldest redheaded mummy ever found, and he was found 3 levels down. I don't mean like 3 stories in one building. I mean like 3 different layers of civilization. One had come in and built, and then another, and then some event happened. They were buried and wiped out, and then another group came in and built something, and they were wiped out. He was found at the bottom layer of this 3 layers of civilization, and there were 2, if not 3, different phenotypes living in um, this city, or whatever you want to call it, group of people. And that you had the tall, redheaded, fair-skinned giant who was made king because he killed all the animals that were eating this pygmy race. These people weren't even 4 feet tall, and they had a completely more Asiatic type of burial, whereas this redheaded warrior had a completely separate type of burial religious ceremony, and that they were cooperating, living together, but obviously had different kind of funerary customs. And this has been found all over the Americas, from Alaska now to the Mississippi Valley. So we're dealing with different religions, different people, different sizes, shapes, skin colors, everything. We have mummies that are black haired with curls in Arizona and Utah. We have redheaded mummies in Arizona and Utah, fair skinned. So the mummies come in all shapes and sizes. But yeah, they go all the way up to 10 feet in height, and you don't really find too many below 6 feet. When you get into the more dwarf pygmy size, they burned their bodies and they put them in funerary urns. So they were rarely ever found in whole skeletons. Very interesting stuff. The Indians universally disclaim our ancient works and monuments, which we attribute to the Aborigines, and allege that these works were erected by white people. Now, these stories exist all around. Quote Aborigines or Native Americans. All of them have stories of a race that was here antecedent to them and built all kinds of crazy shit, and that they found mummies all the time, and they knew a lot of these cultures traveled in these cave systems. I mean, just look at some of these Civil War stories where they talk about, the Apaches and all these other tribes that could disappear into the caves, and then they'd be 100 miles away. They were aware of these, and they were aware that in these cave systems, especially in California and Utah, where these stories are still kind of kept alive today because you have an old enough history, Hopi, Apache. Some of these tribes are still living on these lands they've been on for 200 plus years, and then they have the historical records handed down from generation to generation, talking about not only red-headed giants, but um, incredible burial chambers inside these cave systems. And they held these cave systems sacred because that was their way of escaping, when they were being persecuted and chased. And some of these cave systems, they said you could go underground in Utah and come out in Mexico. And I don't doubt that for a second. We've talked about hundreds and hundreds of miles of cave systems that you can go in and spend a weekend and never see the sun. Mr. Thomas Bodley was informed by Indians of different tribes northeast of the Ohio that they had understood from their old men that it had been a tradition among their several nations that Kentucky had been settled by whites and that they had been exterminated in war. They were of the opinion that the old fortifications now to be seen in Kentucky and Ohio were the productions of those white inhabitants. Now, whether or not they're white or whatever, again, skin color was irrelevant in this time frame. And the big thing that I wanted to read this prior to that fortification episode is that they're saying the same thing, that whether or not they really know for sure that a quote white race built these giant star forts and fortifications is irrelevant. I mean, it's not irrelevant, but whether or not they were white or not, I don't really, that means nothing to me. It's just showing again that they even said that these forts were antecedent to them, and probably even perhaps if they were directly related to the mound builders, I'd go even farther back and say that they were before. Remember, many of these mounds were actually buildings, and these people were just burying their kings and queens on top of these buildings. This is kind of the story with Easter Island. Easter Island was this huge structure, huge subterranean tunnels that are super ancient, and that they just found bodies like on the top of these giant cyclopean um, um, edifices, and that they are fairly certain that the bodies buried on top of these structures, they had nothing to do with building these structures. They just came upon this and were thought these were gods or built by gods, and that their chiefs and higher ups, kings and queens, would be buried on top of this, where the gods, constructed these types of edifices. And I think this is a similar story. Um, of course, there are burial mounds that were built by Native Americans or Aboriginals, or again, however you choose to label them, but they were built on top of a if it was a burial, it was a burial from a previous age, and more than likely, it was actually a constructed pyramid or building of some kind that had been covered in a deluge or some kind of cataclysmic event. Wapakoneta, Wapakoneta, or Shawnee Chief, when near 120 years old and living on the Al Anglesey River, confirmed the above tradition. An old Indian, in conversation with Colonel James F. Moore of Kentucky, informed him that the western country, and particularly Kentucky, had once been inhabited by white people, but that they were exterminated by the Indians, and that the last battle was fought in the Falls of Ohio, and the Indians succeeded in driving the Aborigines into a small island below the rapids. Now, how funny is that? Again, this is from the 1840, and that they're talking. This is from 1840. They're talking to a chief who's 120. So think about that. He's 120. So that's 1720, and he's saying that in his words, the Aborigines of Kentucky were white. So he's saying we fought and killed the Aborigines, and that they were white. Now, whether or not whatever you make of the story is irrelevant, but it's completely flipped inversion of what we're being told today. And again, I don't necessarily think there were all these warring tribes. I think there were a confederation of people. Whenever you have a huge trade conglomerate or empire, which the Mississippi was, you had all phenotypes living together, kind of like the Atlantis story, that you had people from all around the world living in one city. Last battle of Falls of Ohio, and they succeeded in driving the Aborigines into a small island below the rapids, where the whole of them were cut to pieces. He had said it was undoubted fact handed down by tradition, and that the colonel would have ocular proof when the waters of the Ohio became low. This was found to be correct upon examining Sandy Island, when the waters of the river had fallen, as a multitude of human bones were discovered. The same Indian expressed his astonishment that white people could live in a country once the scene of blood. The Indian chief, called Tobacco, told General Clark of Louisville that the Battle of Sandy Island decided finally the fall of Kentucky with its ancient inhabitants. General Clark says that Kentucky, in the language of the Indians, signifies the river of blood. In addition to the proof of a great battle near the Falls of Ohio, it is said that there was at Clarksville a great burying ground 200 or 300 yards in length. This is likewise confirmed by Major John Harrison, who received the tradition from an Indian woman of great age. Colonel Joseph Davies, when at St. Louis in 1800, saw the remains of an ancient tribe of Sacs, who expressed some astonishment that any person should live in Kentucky. They said the country had been the scene of much blood and was filled with the manes of its butchered inhabitants. He stated also that the people who inhabited this country were whites and possessed such arts as are unknown to the Indians. Colonel McKee, who commanded on the Kanawha when Comstock was inhumanely murdered, had frequently conversed with the chief respecting the people who had constructed the ancient forts. Amanda Meow, I love your channel. I read in a local history book from my town that the natives here in Texas used the caves to help the slaves escape. A bit of a twist. Yeah, absolutely. The Underground Railroad was absolutely connected with a lot of these subterranean tunnels. 100%. And there's been people that have done videos on this before, and that a lot of these the Underground Railroads are parts of buildings even that go 4 or 5 stories down. So What's Micmac saying? People of the Dawn, Wabanaki Confederation. Yep. Yeah. Pretty crazy. I mean, they're getting testimonies from people that are over 100 years old, and this is in 1840. Um, where was I? Yeah, they possessed arts that the Indians did not know. Colonel McKee inquired why the Indians had not learned these arts of the white people. He replied indefinitely, retaining that the Great Spirit had once given the Indians a book which taught them all these arts, and that they had lost it and had never since regained a knowledge of them. That's really interesting. I've heard a story like this before, that God gave them a book that had all this technology, and it's had some pretty interesting biblical overlays. Colonel McKee inquired particularly whether he knew what people it was who made so many mounds in the Ohio and northern places. He declared that he did not know, and remarked that they were not made by his nation or any he had been acquainted with. Colonel McKee then asked him if he could tell who made these old forts. So again, you have this colonel, okay, in 1840 saying, who built these? And remember, the narrative that we're told now is that they were all built during the Civil War, but here you have a colonel who's going, who built these? He answered that he did not know. Last said that a story had been handed down from a very long ago people, that there had been a nation of white people inhabiting the country who made the mounds and forts. He also said that some Indians who had traveled very far west or northwest had found a nation of people who lived as Indians generally do, although of a different complexion. So yeah, 1844, silken hair mummies. Just a lot of really good gems in that article there. Kind of showing you they're talking to people that are 120 in 1840 who are giving you a history that is far from absent in our current recollection of things. Okay, I think we're just about done, and we can start getting into some bigger ones here. I think those were the main ones I wanted to talk about. I wonder if we talked about. Okay, there's one more here. I had some full articles pulled up, but just because we're already down to our last hour, I'm not going to read many. This is a subject that a lot of people have been asking me to talk about, and I haven't. It I've considered making a few episodes on it, but I just it's not something that really sticks out to me, and the stories are kind of wishy-washy. But just because we're in Kentucky and someone had mentioned it to me in my comments not too long ago, I figured I'd show this one. Wild man roams over Kentucky rivers and cliffs. Hairy creature seen by farmhand and party will try to capture him. Now, I know the Sasquatch idea is something that is pretty lively nowadays, and I'm all for it. Some of the earliest quote Sasquatch, they used to be called the orangutan, even before the monkey correlation ape that we make with it today. They would, because they found several of these men. They were over 7 feet tall, some over 8 feet tall. They had long red hair covering their entire body, and they often walked with big staffs, big wooden sticks. And they were so large they'd been seen carrying whole deer and sheep off of farms. This is in Texas and in Louisiana, but here in my home state, Sasquatch is alive and well, and there are tons of really interesting um, experiences that have been shared all throughout the state, Washington, southern Canada. But yeah, it has been reported that a wild man has his haunts in the Kentucky River Hills near Buena Vista, Kentucky. A party is being organized to explore a cave where the creature is believed to have his lair. Now, all of these are connected with caves, all of them. The famous ones in Texas, he disappeared into cave systems, and they never even bothered going after him. They were quite scared of him. To explore a cave where the creature is believed to have his lair and have attempted to capture him. Jim Peters, a farmhand employed by S.D. Scott, postmaster at Buena Vista, while working in Bowman's Woods near High Bridge, a short distance from Buena Vista, was attracted by the peculiar actions of his dog, who came running to him from a thicket nearby, yelping and showing every evidence of extreme fright. This is a super common experience with these, right? Animals always have a really high sense when it comes to this kind of stuff. A moment later, Peter says a creature with the shape of a human being followed the dog and approached within 20 yards of him. when I read this one again, it made my skin crawl just thinking about it. Peters says he was too frightened to run. The apparition kept its eyes on the dog until asked what it is doing there when it disappeared into the woods. Peters says that the creature wore no clothes except a coonskin tied to its loins. Its long black hair streamed down its back and breast in a matted mess and covered the face so that he could not see whether it had a beard or not. Its body was covered with a coat of soft, fuzzy black hair, and its fingers and toenails were long and curved like talons. Peters hurried home and told his employer, who had once organized a party, who went to where the wild man had been seen. They found no trace of him in the woods, but in the mud on the riverbank, they found tracks of bare human feet with claw-like toenails. Meanwhile, the women and children of the vicinity are afraid to leave their homes. Now, believe it or not, from 1860 until about 1910, there were dozens and dozens of these in Kentucky alone, and they're just about in every state. Um, Man, I clipped one a long time ago. Oh, well, look at that, and I pop right to it. Oh, how about that? Okay, I didn't even plan on sharing this, but this one's really interesting. This is one where they catch a supposed wild man. Now, you can find stories in some of these insane asylums where they had captured men like this, and they said that they were just men who had lost their minds, and but their bodies are completely covered in hair. So there are stories in insane asylums of men like this that have been captured. Oh man, what's the date on this? I can't remember. I think this is like 1880. Kentucky wild man. Among the passengers the other night bound for New York from the west on the Day Express was a wild man. So this man's on a train. He occupied his seat in smoking car number 153. He was accompanied by James Harvey and Raymond Boyd, his captors, both of whom belong in Potowac County, Kentucky. They had 3 second-class tickets to New York, which privileges them to 3 seats in the smoking car of any first-class train. When the Day Express arrived, so they caught this man in Kentucky and they're traveling to New York. When the Day Express arrived at the Broad Street station at 8 o'clock, James Harvey ran down the platform into the restaurant and purchased a box of sardines and some sandwiches for the wild man's supper. His companion remained in the smoker in charge of the wild man. He was dressed in citizen's dress and wore big cloth shoes. Isabella, thank you so much. Appreciate your donation. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. For any new people here, 174 in the chat. Thanks for being here, guys. Nice and early. Means a lot that you can get up and join me at this hour. Where was I? So he had cloth shoes on, big cloth shoes. His hair reaches nearly to his waist and falls over his shoulders, completely covering his back. His beard as long and thick, while his eyebrows are much heavier than those of our ordinary human being. There is nothing imbecilic in the wild man's manners or actions. He cannot talk and seldom makes any sound whatever except a low howl like a leopard. His actions are as much like those of a hyena in the zoological gardens as is possible for any human form to be. Raymond Boyd, who seemed to have perfect control over the wild man, said his body was covered with coarse brown hair as thick as the hair of a horse. The palms of his hands looked like the paws of a bear, and his fingernails, which were over an inch long, resembled the claws of an eagle. He was first seen in Potowac County 13 years ago and was known as Mum the Hermit, because whenever anyone accosted him, all he would say was, "Mum's the word." He lived in an old pine hut in the woods for about 5 years and was seldom seen by anyone. Finally, he abandoned the hut and took up his abode in a cave under the ledge of a rock known as Lizard's Rock. A little over 6 years ago, 2 or 3 citizens of Potowac County, while out hunting, saw him running into his cave without a stitch of clothing on. 3 years ago, it was discovered that a thick coat of hair had grown over his body. Boyd and Harvey built a man trap for him over 3 days before he entered it. He was not afraid of any bird or beast of prey, but ran terrified away from any human being who approached him. It took 2 days to accustom the man-beast to their presence. The tinkle of a small dinner bell they had used a great influence over him. He watched the bell intently, but would not touch it. Some time ago, a farmer missed a calf and 2 sheep which had strayed off. They were tracked to Mum's Cave. Here, all trace of them was lost, and it is supposed he devoured them. In his cave, we had occupied for the last 7 or 8 years, Boyd and Harvey found the skeletons of small animals and skins of over 50 snakes. Some of the skins belonged to the most venomous species of reptiles. The floor of the cave was alive with red and green lizards, and hundreds of toads hopped about. The wild man ate the box of sardines ferociously, and the 2 sandwiches which were handed him were greedily pulled apart. He ate the ham and threw the bread away. Whenever a train passed on the opposite track, he crouched down in the corner and seat of terror-stricken. Warlock. The most demonized book I've ever found is Atlantis, Edda, and Bible by Herman Weiland from 1926 and directly addresses much of this. You might dig it. Thank you. Great. Great. I love book recommendations. I will definitely check that out. And I appreciate your donation very much. Where was I? After a train passed, he would put his hands to his ears and listen with a look of animal cunning stealing out of his restless eyes like a panther about to pounce on its prey. Every time the engineer blew his whistle, the wild man would grab the back of the seat with both hands and hold on until the whistle ceased blowing. Boyd had a little tin music box which he manipulated with a crank. The one tune of "Empty is the Cradle" was ground around again and again to the great satisfaction of the ex-hermit, who sat and looked at it silently but would not touch it. When conductor Harry Smith took out his glistening nickel-plated punch to cancel the tickets, the wild man watched the punch intently until he heard it snap. Then he got down in the corner of the seat, fairly shivering with fear, and set up a low howl, supposing, evidently, that the conductor Smith was about to wing him. Boyd and Harvey said that there was a story to the effect that the wild man had originally come from North Carolina and that during the war he had been a sharpshooter on Bald Mountain, and that shortly after the war he had murdered a whole family of settlers in the mountain and fled. Both Boyd and Harvey appear like shrewd fellows and expect to make a fortune out of their prize. Their great anxiety and fear is that the authorities will interfere with them and claim that the man is simply a lunatic and place him in some institution. Now that ties perfectly into what I had been saying. And when I look through some of these records of these old insane asylums, that these quote wild men, these men covered in hair from top to bottom who didn't wear clothes and didn't speak except in animal noises, were often captured and turned into these insane asylums. They had the snake skins in a box in the baggage car together with some other curiosities found in the cave. Boyd said that the wild man will not touch anything but fruit and meat, which he eats ravenously, and much the same as a wild beast. Cigar smoke bothered him a good deal, and he kept driving it away from him with his claw hands. When the train arrived in Jersey City, the men took a carriage and said they were going to take the New Haven night boat from the foot of Peck Slip and avoid a daylight crowd in New York. Yeah, so that was meant to be. I just clicked on it. I wasn't even sure I was going to get to the wild man stuff, but yeah, I haven't really read stuff like that. So hopefully you enjoyed the wild man stuff. It's a little bit different for me, but yeah, there's tons of it. It's everywhere. Whether or not it's some kind of weird delineation of man or some de-evolved version, or what they stated that it was some person that killed a bunch of people and disappeared in the woods. It's up for you to decide. A lot of these stories seem like we're dealing with a separate race. And again, going with how I feel about Tolkien and Truth is Stranger Than Fiction, I definitely think that there were all kinds of different types of man, de-evolved or not. All right, let's get into some bigger articles here. For those that had saw my preview episode I did on the subterranean ocean found below Kentucky, 1,200 feet down, I'm going to do a quick little synopsis, because if you've seen it, you already know, but I'm sure a lot of you in here haven't seen this. So that was wild, man. Yeah, I'm glad you like that, McMac. Yeah, just the type of things that are expressed in this video, the sounds he's making, the shapes of his hands, the body being covered in hair. So many markers show that they were probably looking at some kind of odd hybrid, and not necessarily a person that was part of a war who just went and lived in the woods and then somehow transformed into this person. But anything is possible. So yeah, like I said, I'm going to go over. I'm just going to highlight a few worthy paragraphs here from the article that I went over in the preview episode. So if those of you in here right now that haven't seen the video I did on the subterranean ocean below Kentucky, there's a full video that you can check out. So yeah, the subterranean sea full of icebergs, sharks, and whales. The wonderful cave region of Kentucky surrounds Litchfield on all sides. It is in the midst of the Great Cave Belt, and is properly speaking a strip of country about 50 miles wide and 100 miles long. Now, we've shown that the cave belt is actually far larger. It's thousands of miles, and it goes all along the Mississippi, extending through the Ozarks and up into the Appalachian Range. Um, Again, I'm going to be hopping around for the sake of time. They're talking about caves. New and wonderful discoveries of caves are constantly being made in this vicinity, yet excite only passing notice among the inhabitants, as caves are so common with them. Indeed, they seem to think the crust of the entire globe is a hollow as their own little world around them. Yeah, everyone knew that everything around this area was just built on caves. The latest discovery, however, is of a more exciting nature than anything hereof. In the Grand Avenue Cave, discovered about 2 years ago on the Rogers Farm, there is a bottomless pit, at least a pit that until a few days ago was considered bottomless, and out of which poured forth a mighty volume of cold frost air that would freeze a beef solid before morning if placed over the pit the night previous. Mr. Six, the butcher of the town, has been allowed to use it as a sort of refrigerator, and had the advantage of being enabled at all times to furnish, even in the hottest weather, meats frozen solid. No one dared to descend into the bottomless pit lest the cold should overpower him, and the mystery has remained unsolved until a few days ago. A party of scientists decided at least to make an attempt to solve the mystery. A derelict was erected over the pit, and two coils of rope were wound around the windlass, and this rope and to this rope a cage made of oaken planks was attached. A system of signals was also arranged with a wire and a gong. The exploring party consisted of 8, 4 only of which could be lowered at a time. They consisted of Colonel Jas Alexander of Galatian, Tennessee, the Honorable Hunter Wood of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Colonel John P. Barrett of Hartsford, Kentucky, and the writer of this article. Those who were to follow should, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to read a bunch more names. The cold was intense, but with an abundance of heavy, warm clothing, we decided that we could certainly brave the very peculiar and mysterious cold fully as well as we could on the Earth's surface. We were well supplied with torches, matches, etc., as well as a blanket of provisions, a few tools such as picks, shovels, etc. We entered the cage and gave the order to lower away, amidst the cheers of the great crowd who had come into the cave to see us off on our journey to the interior of the earth. Down, down we went, 300, 500, 800 feet. Would we ever reach the bottom? Would there be rope enough to reach? Were questions that we anxiously endeavored to solve. They lowered us very slowly, very cautiously. Twice we signaled them to stop until we could remove a projecting rock from the path of the cage. At 1,120 feet, as we afterward ascertained, we struck bottom. We signaled the joyful intelligence to those above and had the satisfaction of seeing the cage drawn up for the remainder of our party. The cold was simply intense, and it seemed an age ere they reached us, although not over 15 minutes in all. No time was lost. A great avenue opened before us. The bottomless pit we had descended was its dome, through which a subterranean river had undoubtedly flowed the avenue, being its ancient bed. The avenue in many places is over 100 feet high, with innumerable domes extending probably 1,000 feet towards the Earth's surface. Beautiful pillars of alabaster, millions of stalactites and stalagmites dazzle the eyes like so many diamonds, while the beautiful frostwork formations assumed 1,000 fantastic and bewildering shapes. Astonished and bewildered our senses, we went on. The cold was getting more and more intense. The thermometer carried by one of our parties marked 8 degrees above zero. A terrible roaring noise prevented conversation. As we drew near, we discovered that we had come to a subterranean sea that was dashing against the rocks with terrible fury, and that a number of icebergs were bobbing up and down in the turbulent waters, striking the sides of the domes of the cave. The mystery was now explained to us. We had descended to the level of the sea and found that all out beyond the cave was utterly hollow. The icebergs had cut domes hundreds of feet high and withstood on the bank of a subterranean sea. The icebergs undoubtedly entered a great maelstrom or whirlpool of Norway, or one of a similar nature in the Arctic regions, and are thus singularly preserved in this great subterranean storehouse of nature. In a large bay, which we subsequently discovered at the end of another avenue, we saw several eyeless sharks, also an eyeless whale, which proves that the waters are full of animal life corresponding to the eyeless fish of Mammoth Cave. So I'm gonna stop it there. But yeah, so if you hadn't heard that one before, wow, crazy. I've had a few with eyeless sharks, but nothing like eyeless whales, and the correlation that they make between the maelstrom of Norway and the fact that the icebergs are somehow coming in from the Arctic and ending up below Kentucky is just mind blowing. Where to now? Okay, I got one of the oldest decent articles I could find on the Mammoth Cave, and this is from 1816, and it's a pretty long one. So I'm wondering if this should be a separate video. This is a big boy. Yeah, we're gonna skip this one. I might do a post edit and do a video for this one because this is gonna take probably 20-30 minutes to get through. Okay, so stay tuned for that one. And this one's shorter, and I think this is the one that has a little more. They explored quite a bit more. This one's huge too. Just due to time, I'm trying to pick my. As you can see from the tab up here, we've covered just a little bit of what I wanted to talk about, and that's always the issue here. There's never enough time. Yeah, we're gonna skip that one too. This one's better. This one's better. I like this one. This one has stuff that you can't find in many of the other ones, and it's shorter. So stay tuned. I'll do another little video tomorrow or the next day, and do that article from 1860 on Mammoth Cave. This one is from 1859. Animal Life of the Mammoth Cave. Professor C.W. Wright of Louisville, speaking on the Mammoth Cave, says myriads of bats are found in the Mammoth Cave, especially during the winter months. These animals are not in a torrid state in winter. Robin St. John 49, thank you for your donation. Appreciate you very much and welcome. 205 broke 200. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for being here, guys. Myriads of bats, okay, especially during the winter months. These animals are not in a torrid state in winter, but frequently change their position from one avenue of the cave to another. In these parts of the cave, when there is no air in motion, the bats hang in clusters of thousands, suspended by their hinder extremities, heads downward. The wings of the bats consist of membranous expansions over the fingers of the animals, which are enormously developed. The bat moves through the air like the butterfly and does not produce a rustling sound with his wings like that are produced by birds. The eyes of the bats are much smaller relatively than those of any other nocturnal animal and are very little use to him. In fact, he regulates his movements in flying and securing insects by a sense of resistance, for if the sight of one be destroyed, he is enabled to fly about in a room through which wires are stretched in various directions without striking one of them. He will secure his food upon the same principle, as well as direct his course in the cave, which a short distance from the entrance is absolutely destitute of every ray of light. The bat secures insects and feeds himself by means of the interfermal membrane, which extends from the tail to the hinder extremities, and which the animal uses as a net to catch its prey. The hair on the undersurface of which is arranged in concentric rays, so that when the tail is bent forward, any object on the membrane is rolled to the point of that organ, and thence the animal's mouth. Very interesting. When thrown upon a level surface, the bat cannot rise and fly, but has to crawl to an elevated object from which he throws himself into the air and thus enabled to use his wings. The cave rat is a larger size than the Norway rat. The hair on the back resembles that of a gray squirrel. That on the abdomen and the feet of a light color. The whiskers are long and the eyes are prominent and resemble those of a rabbit. The jaws are powerful. Let's get to some weirder ones. Wild animals such as foxes, wild cats, coons, bears, etc., never enter the Mammoth Cave, nor have their remains ever been found therein. When the Mammoth Cave was first discovered, hundreds of mummies were found in it. This is what I wanted to get to. Again, when the Mammoth Cave was first discovered, hundreds of mummies were found in it. They were dressed in the skins of wild animals, and in many instances were highly ornamented with heads of bone, shells, feathers, etc. They were in a better state of preservation than the mummies of Egypt, and even when exposed to damp atmosphere, showed no disposition to decay. The mummies were preserved mainly by means of smoke, and the place where they were subjected to the antiseptic influence of the agent is still to be seen. It consists of a stick which is suspended between two projecting rocks in an alcove 20 feet above the floor of the main cave. Cross pieces are lashed to the pole by strips of bark upon which the arms and lower extremities were extended. The extremities of the pole bear the marks of the stone hatchet and have remained so long in their present position that they are encrusted with crystals of carbonate of lime. The ceremony of embalming could have been witnessed by at least 10,000 persons, for the avenue in which the operation was conducted is 100 feet wide and half a mile in length. The same point was evidently used at times as a place of torture, inasmuch as bone ashes have been found there, which were evidently those of victims of some barbarous sacrifice. Now, again, remember what I was saying, that you had several different groups of people. Some were cremated, and often they like to jump to conclusions that there was some kind of sacrificial thing going on. But there could have been, but there's a lot of evidence to show that the funerary rites, that they were dealing with many, and they even found um, jars in the Mammoth Cave full of ashes. When the manufacture of saltpeter, so this is the part that I mentioned earlier, and um, really important to think about. When the manufacture of saltpeter was commenced, the mummies were used as fuel and were destroyed in various ways, and a few were carried away and placed in the museums in different parts of the United States. This is one of the only articles where you can find mention of this. That, remember, hundreds of mummies were found, and that they were embalmed in a kind of way of basically being smoked, and that when they first started to use the saltpeter, which was used during wartime, the mummies were used as fuel and were destroyed in various ways, and a few were carried away and placed in the museums in different parts of the United States. It's just horrible. They just burned the mummies up in the cave. So, all right. I don't want to do that one. Yeah, we'll do this one. Kentucky, 1876. The Prehistoric Age. Discovery of another Mammoth Cave near Columbia, Kentucky. 3 human skeletons of extraordinary proportions found in a subterranean vault. Columbia, 1876. About the middle of the past week, 2 young men named White, wildly wandering in a large tract of wild, dense forest in the southeastern part of the country, discovered what they supposed to be a sinkhole or a fox den, and with that idea proceeded to explore it. After a little trouble in making their way through the entrance, the cave became large enough to admit their walking upright. They had proceeded thus in the passage probably 150 yards when they emerged into a large and picturesque gallery, the beauty and grandeur of which will rival that of the old Mammoth itself. The room, according to their calculations, was about 150 by 100 feet and abounds in all varieties of stalactites and stalagmites. But 'tis not the things that we naturally expect to find in caves that I wish to mention, particularly by the curious remains that were discovered therein. In the northeast corner of the first gallery, about 5 feet from the ground, they noticed some strange characters or hieroglyphics neatly carved in the wall, which upon close examination proved to be the head rock of a vault. A few minutes prizing served to loosen this and disclose to view the interior of an enclosure in the solid rock of about 5 feet by 10 feet, which contained the remaining of 3 human skeletons, which measure 8 feet 7 inches 8 feet, measure 8 feet 7.5 inches, 8 feet 5 inches, and 8 feet 4 3/4 inches in length, respectively. The heads were laying towards the east, each body parallel to the other. Beside them lay three huge, what looked to be swords, but were so decayed that upon being touched immediately crumbled to dust. After examining the remains closely, but finding nothing that would serve to throw any light on the question as to who and from whence they are, they closed the vault, but in doing so knocked their torch out, which they had contrived before entering, leaving them in anything but a pleasant predicament. After searching some time for their lost treasure, they concluded to try to escape by feeling their way out. But in this, they made the matter worse. They stated that after leaving the first large room, they struck a good sized branch and continued following it until forced to turn into another passage, the stream disappearing suddenly in a huge perpendicular gulch, which led them into another spacious hall, the size of which they believed to be quite as great as the first. Out of this second opening and through what they conceived to be three others similar in at least size, their way seemed to gradually ascend until their hearts were made glad by the discovery of light ahead, and finally emerged from their ugly confinement through a hole about midway the cliff of Russell's Creek. Having been confined in their subterranean discovery over 38 hours. The whole country thereabout is rife with speculation concerning the interesting discovery, and numbers of citizens will visit it as soon as the Messrs. White finish their work of rendering the entrance less difficult to pass. The above is a correct account and may be relied on, as the young men are of impeccable veracity. With a party from town, your correspondent will start in the morning to further explore, and should new curiosities present themselves, will give you the account of an eyewitness. Well, I checked the Hartford for the following days and nothing ever pops up. So you can imagine why. But yeah, three giant skeletons, all well over 8 feet, heads facing east, three giant swords. Pretty nuts. What are we at here? 650. We're gonna skip that one. Oh, this is a huge one. Yeah, that covers Tennessee and Kentucky, so we'll skip that one. Okay, here's a good one. A shorter one. Explored a wonderful cave. Who would have thought Kentucky would have been the capital of the caves? Well, some of the craziest Egyptian relics ever found were found in Kentucky caves, and there's just dozens of them. What date? What was the date on this one? 1891. Explored a wonderful cave. The mummified remains of prehistoric man discovered in Kentucky. The wonders of Hundred Dome Cave, which lies about 6 miles east of Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, are, according to a letter received here today, destined to produce a sensation when they shall have been made known to the world. The letter referred to was written by Peter Brizendine of Litchfield, Kentucky, and is as follows. In connection with some gentlemen from New York who are here buying asphalt lands, I have explored some of the noted caves of this Edmonson County. Yesterday, I explored what is known as the 100 Dome Cave, about 6 miles east of Mammoth Cave. In it, I found undoubted evidence of a race of human beings of a great antiquity. In niches of the caves, I counted over 2,000 mummified skeletons or bodies of what must have been a large and very superior race of men, evidently dating back beyond our history of Adam and the Garden of Eden many thousands of years. The bodies are in an excellent state of preservation, and I intend to remove about 10 of them at once to Boston for the benefit of the scientific world. The 100 Domed Cave is one of the greatest curiosities in the known world. As its name implies, it consists of hundreds of domes, in some places over 100 feet in length. Beautiful pillars of alabaster and stalagmites and stalactites add to the embellishment. Then there is a vast subterranean lake fed by a subterranean river of many miles in extent. The lake is filled with eyeless fish and eyeless turtles. I have secured numerous specimens, which I now have in a tank at the house of T.R. McBeats, the circuit judge of this district, Litchfield, Kentucky. In his address, Dr. Woods, the postmaster, Litchfield, Kentucky, near here, and M.J. Cunningham of Cunningham Merchants of Litchfield, accompanied me on my tour of exploration of these ancient caves and will cheerfully testify to all the facts above mentioned. Yeah, the 100 Dome Cave. You can find some more good articles on this, but they never discuss the 2,000 mummified bodies. So you can only imagine. In a lot of instances, when there were too many, they just burned them, as I stated in that previous article. So you can kind of see there's absolutely a bit of an agenda, unfortunately. They'll take out the specimens that they feel like they can get a good chunk of money for, and then yeah, like they stated above, they'll just burn the rest. It's horrible. Again, that was 100 Dome Cave, 1876, 1891. Da, 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 da. Another Kentucky wonder. I think this is a similar time frame. But yeah, hope you guys are enjoying this one. As you can see, try to mix it up a bit, but I think Kentucky warranted a more of a subterranean focus. Um, and this isn't even a third. No, this isn't even a tenth of the cave articles that I have. They found within 10 miles of Mammoth Cave, they found like 10 or more cave systems that are miles and miles long. And they postulate further along that they believe many of these cave systems eventually connect with one another. And I definitely lead towards that assumption. But yeah, let's just run through here. Sherry, good to see you. Good morning. Risen Ability, thanks for being here. Mr. C, they burned mummies like cordwood and steamships in the 1800s. Wow, yeah, I don't doubt it. Sold to private collectors, yeah, for sure. Absolutely, they were. Like they stated before, many were sold to privates and private collectors, and many were distributed. And as I stated, that many of the mummies that were found in Colorado and Arizona were shipped to Europe and put in museums there, labeled under what? Found in Egypt, Egypt as we know it. What year was this? That was 1891. Hawaii's of Maui are asking for prayers. Prayers, yeah, for sure. Yeah, crazy story there, Sherry. My grandmother actually had a house in Lahaina, and in middle school and high school, I spent a lot of time in that region. So when I saw that, I remember a million flashback memories of all those beaches and the surf shop, skate shop that I'd go to there in town, and yeah, horrible, horrible. Blessings and prayers for the people in Maui for sure. Ever wonder where the source of John Carter of Mars stemmed from? Funny you bring that up, Warlock. It's one of my favorite movies. Yeah, I have to do. I believe it or not, I plan on doing a video breakdown of that movie. And now that you mentioned it, I feel like I need to watch it again. Yeah, fantastic movie. Great little short book kind of comic series as well. Lots of really good stuff in there. The comic book genre and the fantasy novel genre are all based on historical evidences, in my opinion. Oh, Mr. C, thanks for the donation. Appreciate you very much. Hope you guys are enjoying this material. Just wanted to run through here and say hi to everybody and make sure I spend a little more time in the comments, because I tend to just get stuck reading articles and don't pay enough attention to you guys. 189 in the chat. Thanks, each and every one of you. I had some of these that had some interesting overlays, but I don't want to read something that is the same cave system. So apologize. I'm just gonna. Nope, this is a different one. So just to show you how many crazy cave systems are here. Okay, this is a longer version of a shorter article I read earlier. Um, um, okay, so it's the same one. Phew, thank goodness I realized that before I. Catacombs. This is a good one. This is good correlates with what I was saying about many of the cities of Kentucky are built over these cave systems. So even though we're talking a lot about the area around Mammoth Cave, caves are found all throughout the entire Kentucky region, all around the Mississippi in general. Um, this one is from the 1880s or 19. Uh, let me look back real quick. I think it was 1920s. I can often tell by the text, and whenever there's ads, you know it's like 1910 or later. I think it's 1920s. Oh, this one's dated 1924. Nesbitt. Okay, there you go. 1924. I was close. Mummies found in Kentucky cave. So this just goes to show you again, like I was saying. Now they're finding mummies in the caves. That really long article from the 1800s that I'm just gonna have to do a separate video on because it's gonna take me at least half an hour just to read it. They discussed that the caves in Kentucky were explored in the 1700s and they were known of. This one kind of touches on it too. Here, this is perfect. Okay. Mummies found in Kentucky cave. Catacomb discovered under ruins of old city. The students of American antiquities, it is probably of general knowledge that the city of Lexington, Kentucky, stands nearly on the site of an ancient town, which, if one may judge by the wide range of its circumvallatory works and quantity of ground it must have occupied, was once of great extent and magnificence. Yeah, all these cities that we inhabit today are built on the ruins of ancient cities for sure. It may, however, well be doubted if many of even such students are aware that in the year 1775 there was discovered there a catacomb. So a catacomb below Lexington containing a number of mummies preserved by the art of embalming to as great of a state of perfection as was known among the ancient Egyptians 1800 years before the Christian era. This extraordinary find was made by some of the early settlers. So, I found mummies all the way through into California, right? But Kentucky's caves have more mummies than have ever been found anywhere else in the world, without a doubt. Without a doubt, more than anything in Egypt. The extraordinary find was made by some of the early settlers, whose curiosity, being excited by something unusual in the character of certain large stones seeming to cover the entrance to a cavern of some sort, removed the same, coming to others whose singular appearance for stones in a natural state caused them to push their investigations further. These obstructions being taken away, the mouth of an apparently deep and gloomy cave was disclosed to their gaze. This proved to be a catacomb formed in the bowels of the limestone rock about 15 feet below the surface of the earth. Having added to their numbers and provided lights, they descended and entered without further obstruction a spacious apartment where they were astounded to find that at the sides and extreme ends were formed niches and compartments occupied by figures representing men. Their surprise was much greater when, on further research and inquiry, it was found that these figures were actually mummies in the condition before stated. Most unfortunately, the original discoverers were uneducated people, and it being at a period when a bloody and inveterate war was being carried on between the Indians and the whites, supposing, in their ignorance, that these were the remains of the tribe of Indians, a revengeful and vindictive spirit urged them to destruction. It's horrible, isn't it? This just seems like even from the 1700s into the 1900s, all these thousands and thousands of mummies were just being destroyed. And the really special ones were just sent off all around. So, man, I'm glad that I got to that one because there's a few other ones I hope I haven't pulled up. I probably don't. But Louisville is built on top of a subterranean catacomb, and there was another city. I had mentioned it earlier. What was the name of it? I want to get the name right, so give me 1 second here. Um, this one, Paduak and Paduak. Paduak up here is a whole catacomb full of mummies. So Lexington, Lewisburg, Louisville, sorry, and Lexington, built on top of a subterranean ancient cave system full of mummies, thousands. Crazy. This was a shorter one, and it had some good stuff in it. I think was this the one, Foxton? Yep, that's the one I already covered, so that's easy to move on past. Relics of a Strange Race. This is a good one. Copper and mica. I want to touch on that. I'm not going to get to this book. Okay, so we're doing all right. We'll do 2 more articles here, and then we'll call it a day. What did I miss here? Here's a thought I've been playing with. America was Egypt before Napoleon discovered Egypt. Look, yeah, I mean, the whole narrative of Napoleon is a bunch of doo-doo. And the Louisiana Purchase, correlating again with this false figure that is Napoleon. I definitely think that Napoleon was a creation to hide either a large time frame or a group of people that were wiped out. When you look at the city of France or the country of France as we know it, the French language is new to France. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Why did only like 1% of French people speak French in the 1700s? That's something that nobody talks about. And the narratives going along with the French and the Civil War tied into this whole region. And yeah, Napoleon's comet, all that stuff correlating with the New Madrid event. And I did a video that talks about the comet being in the sky for a week, and the aurora borealis, and mountains being turned to volcanoes, and earthquakes kicking off, and electrical sounds being heard. Electrical shocks, but a million times louder than electrical shock being heard all over the region. I think that these characters are just describing events, and yeah, so I'm with you there for sure. Lots going on between 1790 and 1830. Lots going on. Lots going on. A lot of holes. Some of the biggest holes in the newspaper archives are in that time period from 1790 to 1840. As soon as the gold rush kicks off and you have this false migration of all of these workers. I mean, another thing people need to think about too is that 50% of the workforce of America pre 1840 was children. Yeah, arc, exactly. McMack gets it, 100%. Yeah, what kicked off the deluge? Um, yeah. So yeah, like I was saying, 50% of the workforce in America in the early 1800s was children. How does that make any sense? What's going on? We don't have enough men to even run factories. We don't have enough people to even run these factories. And most of these people are being imported from Europe. America west of the Mississippi was in ruins for 50 years, you know. Yeah, lots of holes in our history, and I'm just trying to find as many interesting things as I can to kind of put some pieces back together, I suppose. I don't know. Hopefully you just enjoyed listening to some of these articles as much as I love reading them. Okay, so this is Relics of a Strange Race, and this is 1897. Dr. A.H. Cordier goes delving after specimens. Interesting find in one of the Indian mounds of old Kentucky, a metal cross that is a rarity. While rummaging through the burying ground of a race of people long dead, Dr. A.H. Cordier of this city unearthed a number of relics of irresistible interest to archaeologists. Buried deep beneath the soil of old Kentucky, he found the bones of a people of whom history tells us little, whose traditions have faded into myths, and whose habits of life are less substantial than the baseless fabric of a dream. That the final resting place of this race was the burying ground of a warlike people is shown by the arrowheads and other implements of crude warfare found beside the crumbling bones of men who fought and died before the pale rays of civilization began to illumine the east. Dr. Cordier brought a number of these relics to Kansas City last September. He went on a visit to the old Kentucky home, and while there, he paid a visit to the historical Pond River country in Hopkins County, where the mounds of the ancient race are still to be found, and the winds and rains of many years having but slight effect on their evenly rounded surface. Dr. Cordier says the mounds are located on a level, elevated tract of ground some 200 feet above the river. The mounds are very similar in shape, being oval and varying in size from mere graves to elevations 15 feet high and from 5 feet to 30 feet to 30 yards in length. One can scarcely estimate the original height of these mounds, says the doctor, as centuries of vertical denudation has reduced them very much. This locality was either the site of a bloody conflict in which many were killed and the victors remained to bury their dead, or the burial place for ages of a large and densely populated district. There are hundreds of small burial sites or graves, each containing one or two more skeletons. The bones are usually near the surface, and many have rough stone slabs surrounding the remains. A farmer living in the vicinity of this burial site, who had plowed into a number of graves, calls attention to the fact that the thigh bones were often found parallel with the vertebrae in the ribs. He remarked that he believed they cut the dead in two at the junction of the thighs with the body and then placed the disjointed members alongside of the body. They buried their dead as evidently did the ancient Peruvians. Important note here. With the thigh bones flexed on the abdomen. Dr. Cordier opened one of the largest mounds, its dimensions being about 15 feet high, 70 feet in length, and 30 feet in horizontal measurements. Abundance of stone is to be found within a few hundred feet of this mound, yet it is a curious fact that the mound was remarkably free of such. A trench some 300 yards in length led from this mound to the river. This was evidently used for a protection against an enemy in going to and from the source of their water supply, says the doctor. Yeah, I don't know about that. I've been talking about these forts and stuff and these massive constructions, and that often you would find these uh, burials on top of these big structures and buildings. And that's what I think is going on here. This was evidently a half a mile to the east of this mound is an excavation from which the dirt was transported to build this burial spot, relic repository, or worship site. That these mounds were built as burial sites is an evidence that they respected their dead, as the building of the mounds must have cost them much time and labor. Their faith in a future state is suggested by the presence of weapons and other stone implements placed by the side of the departed. The presence of ashes and charcoal on these mounds at their base has led to the belief that these ancient people cremated their dead. Yeah, as I said, that we're dealing with several different funerary rites here. This seems to be an ungrounded belief, as the bones would be destroyed as well as the flesh by the intense heat. Charcoal and ashes are made germ proof by the heat and are thus made most excellent preservative agents. And for this reason, these ancient people placed the dead bodies in charcoal and ashes. The ashes in the mounds are always dry, and the shape of the mounds and the natural drainage afforded by their location would imply that since the day the ashes were placed there, no moisture has reached them. And one of the reasons why I wanted to share this was this metallic cross taken from the mound and the Peruvian overlays, because the farther south you go, you keep finding this cross more and more and more, especially once you get into Peru. Their stone implements for household uses are destroyed by much heat as they break easily when heated. In close proximity to these mounds, many bones of prehistoric animals have been found. And an oven in the same grave, the bones of the mastodon have been discovered, thus showing this extinct gigantic animal lived before or at the same period as the mound builders. Really important distinction to make. Um, Man walked with beast. There wasn't hundreds of thousands of years between these timelines. And some of these mammoths were huge. Holy smokes. I got some petrified tusks that are 18 feet long, 20 feet long. I mean, think of a 20-foot long tusk, how big this thing had to be. I have one mammoth skeleton that, if I remember correctly, was like 8 feet long. So huge, 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 huge. It correlates with the Carson, Nevada, the 10-foot tall giant who was building a blind on the side of a lake in Nevada, hunting mammoth. So man and mammoth, and he had a pet dog following him. They assumed that it was with him. The steps were right alongside of him. Okay, so extinct mastodon, stone implements, and flint arrowheads. They are rarely associated with metal objects in any locality, save in Michigan. A few copper pieces have been found. The mound opened by Dr. Cordier is shown in this picture on this page. It was excavated by plows and scrapers. The soil from which the mound was made had been taken from the surrounding hills and had been carefully freed from rocks and stone. At the base of the mound was a layer of ashes and charcoal, and in this was found the remains of these strange people, along with their weapons of warfare and household utensils. A very remarkable find was here made, that of a cross pictured with this article. The vertical piece of this cross is exactly 2 inches long by 3/8 wide and 1/8 thick. The horizontal bar was 5/8 of an inch from the top of the vertical bar and 1 inch 1/8 long. The whole shows well marked signs of the mold in which it was cast. So casting metals, again, this cross is composed of some metal or combination of metals harder than lead and softer than iron. Interesting. The finding of a metallic cross with the stone relics of a prehistoric race is certainly very remarkable. These people lived presumably in the Stone Age at a time when no metal was used. Yeah, we know better than to think that now, don't we? The finding of the cross of this perfect design, so much like our Christian emblem, would seem to imply that this little relic was of a more modern date. Dr. Gordier, yet, when it is recalled that the cross is of great antiquity in all countries, the idea of its being a modern cross lost by a latter race vanishes. The Egyptians used it to symbolize eternal life. Regardless of the fact that it had been found in other countries, the finding of such in the United States is certainly very rare. And from this, if from no other reasoning, the discovery of this little metal emblem in a mound made of a race of people who left no written or other history as to who they were, why they lived, where they came from, or where they went, is food for thought for all interested archaeology. I'm going to stop there. It just goes on to talk a little bit more, hypothesizing about the cross, but you already know. I wanted to go as far as the Egyptian used it to symbolize Egyptian or eternal life. And with all of the mummies that we've been finding, I think that's the strongest correlation we have right there. And that's as far as we need to go. I think that brings us to the end of our episode. Yeah, so stay tuned at a later date. I'll do this article here from 1816, and it's got some pretty interesting stuff in it. And they talk about some of the dates that it was first explored, early 1700s, and so yeah, that'll be fun. As always, 188 of you made it to the end. I appreciate you all very much. I know those long-winded reads can be a little on the boring side, but I hope the material um, interests you. And yeah, just run through the chat real quick before I call it a day here. Mr. C, thank you as always. Appreciate everybody. Appreciate all of your donations. Bridget, thank you. Yeah, thanks for being here. Oh, Warlock, if this article interests you, you look into the book Atlanta? Okay, yeah. Okay, I will. I'll definitely do that. I will save that book title. In fact, I'm gonna type it in right now. Atlantis, Edda, and Bible. Edda and Bible. Okay. Yeah. Thank you everybody for those who donated and just for being here. That means the most to me. Mick Mac, thanks for sticking out with me for so long. So many overlays here, yeah, and as we get further east, it's going to get even crazier. And as we go into Ohio and Illinois, it's just going to continue. So stay tuned for, more to come. Next Tuesday, what is that? We finally, nope, still in August. Next Tuesday, the 29th. Yeah, so from Kentucky, we're going to hop into Illinois, I think. I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I'm leaning towards. So, yeah, thanks for being here. Stay tuned for more episodes later this week. And I look forward to hopefully seeing a lot of you guys again next Tuesday. And make sure to, if you have any other comments or information you want to share or things that stood out that I may have missed, Mercedes, thank you so much. Donations, we really mean a lot. Appreciate it very much. Make sure to leave a comment and give me any suggestions or things that popped up in your mind or whatever, anything. Let me know. And Ben, do you have any Maryland stuff coming? Oh, I have a lot on Maryland. Sure. Yeah, I have a lot on just about every state. Um, and I'm going to work my way there. I'm only 16 episodes in, so when am I going to get to Maryland? God only knows, but it'll happen. So stay tuned. Um, yeah. Thanks all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you everybody for the donations. It's amazing. Thank you so much. It really does mean a lot. Putting these together. It's been years of work, and just getting these episodes ready takes hours and hours, and it means so much to me and my family. So love you guys very much. Connecticut. Connecticut, I don't have a ton on Connecticut, believe it or not. There's some material there. There's definitely some subterranean stuff there, some interesting underground vaults, interesting underground train station. But yeah, Connecticut being so small, and I haven't looked through in a while, so I can't say. Those are just the ones that pop off the top of my head. But yeah, stay tuned. I know everyone here is from different states, and they're all looking forward for more material in their own area. And yeah, you just got to give me time. So one a week, and with some weeks off here and there. So we'll get there. So thanks again, everybody. How about Idaho? Is there a lot on it? I have quite a bit on Idaho. Yes, absolutely. I actually meant on going back and doing Idaho when I finished my Utah show, but because the material led me closer to the Texas and Mississippi region, I ended up just shying away from it. Idaho was a territory like Oregon. Oregon territory actually was Idaho for a long, long period of time. So I had to go through and filter material based on when states became states and when they were territories and what was actually existing in those boundaries, early in the 1800s. But yeah, thank you guys. Stay tuned for one more video from Kentucky on that old Mammoth Cave article. And if you haven't checked out some of my more recent videos, I definitely would. They've definitely seemed to been a hit with everybody. So yeah, appreciate you all very much, and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. And look forward to seeing as many of you as you can make it for next week's episode. Love you guys. Have a wonderful day.